Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill him! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Okay, Zuki, plug your Twitter, plug yourself a little bit, and give a funny anecdote. It doesn't necessarily have to be about crack cocaine, perhaps.
Okay.
But anything you want, Zuki, and tell people what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for coming on as well.
Yeah. So thank you for having me on, Jen. I'm I go by Zuki now, and that's kind of like my Twitter X. That's now X persona. It's at Zuki 2024, Zuki _2024. And I've been on your show before under a different account that got it is no longer with us. I don't want to violate the
I
terms.
updated the show notes actually, so it's all coherent now.
Yeah,
It'll all link together, so it'll all be, this account will you'll be you're reoccurrent like for this account, so it's all good.
Okay, great. But yeah, and prior to some of my before I kind of adopted the aesthetics for being a Kaneda, I had I was actually going for a Judge Dredd type of aesthetic, or really championing him. Although I consider myself just one of the judges, or like my persona was being one of the judges, not really Judge Dredd himself, because Judge Dredd is in a world where he's one of many judges. He just happens to be the most infamous, notorious, most like respected, most honored one, I guess, and as the street patroller of like 20 of Megacity 1. Not and of the 2080 comic series, which is he's probably the most famous character. So yeah.
Well, I'm really excited because Judge Dredd is an amazing comic book, and the art is so kino, as the kids say.
Yeah.
And I have infinite opportunities for the show cards, so I'm excited for that. And also, I think that you are kind of the right one to lead us through like the hermeneutic of Judge Dredd, or like the different properties, because it's a very long running series, and it's had many different like artists, writers, like everyone who's been like a who's who in graphic novels, comic books, and like inking, all of it, like illustration. They've pretty much had like a strip, or they've done a feature or special. So I think it's an incredible series, and I do think that you kind of do fit that archetype of a judge.
No, I don't know if I can agree with this, because I'm not a cop yet. People have accused me of being a Fed, and I also like to, be pro. In some ways, like kind of favor a lot of outlawish behavior in the current generation of motorcycle riders, and hopefully it still continues on. Although I might be dismayed if, due to whatever reason, kids stop getting on motorcycles and kind of live by their own rules, so to speak. With that, besides maybe even defying some laws of physics, outside and besides breaking the law. So at least the traffic laws. I don't know about any other stuff, but no, but Judge Dredd is obviously against all that, and he lives in a very, he's a character. I think that resonates a lot with even more now than ever. I was one of the first guys. I mean, I was probably one of those like few guys on like within that right wing Twitter back in like 2017 that really embraced the Judge Dredd character, like lore and posting and all this stuff. Um, Meanwhile, most of the other people were kind of like into like the Warhammer stuff. I mean, there's like I'm sure there were other few guys that really loved Judge Dredd and kind of championed him, and the kind of posted with like a Judge Dredd avatar profile pic or whatever you want to call it now, um, and try to like make references to the character and the world building of that of his universe of the 2000 AD thing. Um, so yeah, I don't know what else to kind of go from there. I just find the comic books were great. They inspired. I mean, they're like Judge Dredd and 2000 AD stuff was also directly inspired Warhammer, and it's just like now the Warhammer audience seems like it's very male coded, like a lot of like a lot of dudes on the political right fucking love Warhammer and the lore. And again, and I'm not gonna try to say, oh, they just totally ripped off Judge Dredd, but they like the creators of Warhammer were huge fans of Judge Dredd. It's very fucking obvious. It's been well documented they were, or they make nods to it. While I still kind of want to champion that, and Judge Dredd again, he's become much more popular than ever, mainly because of the times. Outside of guys that really into like futurism, cyberpunk, that type of genre of like science fiction, and that's really refreshing because I see more like essay videos on YouTube. People reference Karl Urban's Dredd back in like 2012 as just like a masterpiece.
It
Um,
is. Just for the
and like
record, I do think that it is a masterpiece.
yeah, and and I'm just glad about that. There's some developments I'm kind of a little worried about, but again, it's like a lot of his stuff really resonates with a lot of people in this day and age of rampant problems, societal problems. So
Well, it is kind of there is an element of anarcho-tyranny in the
yeah,
entire kind of megacity complex of the world.
really, I don't know how did that. So how does that go about?
Well, because there is rampant criminality, despite
Uh-huh.
it being highly hierarchical, could even say like a little fascist, or a little. It's just it's ruled by by the council, right? So it's a long way up, but the people below are just they are running amok, you could say, running wild.
Well,
So
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. So that's what I think anarcho-tyranny. It's like the judges try and keep it together, but to quote the Karl Urban movie, it's bursting at the seams.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, the concept of anarcho-tyranny, though, again, is coined by like so-called paleo-conservative, a guy like Sam Francis, was kind of it was more adjacent to like a lot of white nationalist politics, I guess, if it's fair to say that. But again, but he did make a correct assessment about the world we're living in. Although I even say it's not, I wouldn't even call it um anarcho-tyranny. It's just I don't know if it's how much of it has become intentional, but it's basically just tyranny itself. Just that
Mhm.
it's left-wing tyranny. It's basically you let people you're sympathetic to off with this whole good old boy pat on the like slap on the wrist system for those you deem worthy that or those deemed considered underprivileged, so you have to systematically privilege them. And so you have these like career criminals, you could call it, it's not even career so much as these are just just like basically like mentally ill people that really aren't well, are kind of hopelessly underproductive or counterproductive or damaging to society. They're let off in the streets, um, and kind of committing more heinous crimes until it becomes like a little too heinous, and then they're kind of finally maybe removed, but you'll have judges that'll go, just give him like this guy 5 years for murdering somebody or like raping a kid, right? And that's the term like cruelty. No. Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. And so you have this whole situation going on, and people, that's is what a lot of the grievances are in modern day um, politics and observances within a lot of Western societies. And again, a place where this doesn't fucking fly in a lot of East Asian countries.
Mhm.
But oh yeah, go ahead.
No, that's a great point, Zuki. I think that you're right. I think that, okay, so to respond to 3 points. So the Warhammer, that's a great point. I'm not a Warhammer. I never played, so I don't really have any conceptual understanding of
Me
the.
neither. I just have too many friends to Warhammer instead of Judge Dredd. But I always bring this up, like, hey, listen, I've been a Judge Dredd fan for decades, and like again, it's Judge Dredd that in like the world of Mega City One and 2008 stuff that inspired a lot of Warhammer stuff, 40K or whatever version they have now.
No, I agree with that. I think that there is a little bit of the J autism that makes Warhammer 40K or whatever it is. I think that they like that whole sort of like strategic movements in the, like they like the macro, and then people who like Judge Dredd are, I would say, more drawn to the story, although it's, as you very well said, it's not necessarily about just Judge Dredd. It's like about, there's multiple characters, there's female characters, there's mutant characters, so it's not singular, but it still revolves kind of around a tighter circle. So it's definitely more of a story driven property, although of course lore in Warhammer is big. I also think what you said about Anarcho-Tyranny was fair. I'm using it definitely in the more very online way, like without any sort of contextualization to any right-wing thinkers or anything, just like how I've heard it used on Twitter. So I think you were correct in that as well. I think we should. Okay, so mercy to the guilty. I think that's a great point. So ISO cubes and the mega cities. Do you want to explain a little bit of that, Zuki, for people who have never cracked Judge Dredd, like one of the compilations, or watch the film? And then also, I had another point, but now I've totally forgotten. Okay, so the mega city and ISO cubes. Sorry about
yeah,
that.
so the ISO cubes, and this is like it's basically their form of prison in the future, in the future city of Mega City One. It's their version of prison. I assume most of it is actually kind of set in like a little cell in kind of like a solitary confinement kind of thing. I mean, it's apparently maddening and worse and terrible for those getting sentenced. It's not a fun time when you're sentenced to like however so many years in the ISO cubes, as a judge sentences you, not just Dredd, but like the judge system throughout the city. Um, and yeah, they just kind of take you out there. It's basically um, it's basically a cell, like and there's sometimes they're locked in like by wire. I mean, somehow the how the comics kind of portray the whole like system where they kind of lock you in kind of like Matrix style or whatever. They might connect you with like fucking like cybernetics into your brain to like keep you captive, so to speak, and whatnot. But yeah, I gotta like I was actually gonna do a deep dive on the ISO cubes earlier, but from what I understand, there are also penal colonies within the Judge Dredd universe. It's not just ISO cube stuff; it's also um, people put to work, kind of old prison style chain gang kind of stuff, but like in their version of it. And that's also like an opportunity given to get away from the ISO cube stuff, where they're kind of deprived of a lot of sensory, books or TV or whatever, in that could really drive anyone crazy. But it's just kind of so it's like, well, then you got to go to work, you got to go to some like Mars colony and start working there to like mine shit or whatever. Again, this stuff does happen in the Judge Dredd universe, but um And yeah, there's like there's one story, this Judge Dredd comic on Redemption. I actually ordered on Amazon that I haven't read yet. That kind of talks about some of it. So there you go.
Sorry about that, Zuki. I muted myself. Thank you for that. I think that I remembered my point. Mercy to the guilty. One of the first Judge Dredd stories is, well, maybe not one of the first ones, but it's one of the first ones I remember, is about how the robot kills someone. This robot kind of goes out of control. He goes to the council and they were like, no, we can't shut him down. We're not going to shut down this like series of robots. And then basically he escapes, murders a bunch of scientists, and he incites like a robot rebellion. So it's kind of about how Judge Dredd is like the lone voice of severity, the lone voice of we should do something active. And everyone else is like, no, we have to be nice to the robots. So I just thought that's an interesting kind of framework to. He's often like that. It's not that he's particularly harsh, although he is that too. But I think he's also he's sometimes the only rational actor in a very irrational world that is supposedly runs on very rigid rules, but he's kind of a rule breaker as well, as you alluded to.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say but that's not my attraction. That I guess he would bend the rules. He would do things that um are maybe considered a bit Machiavellian, devious. But here's the key concept, though, is that he is not a corrupt judge. He is not corruptible. Oh, by the way, just as like a weird short correction, like they don't have a penal colony on Mars. They have a penal colony on Titan. Um, Although Mars does exist in the Judge Dredd universe as a planet, but there's also Martians in Mars. But the penal colony there is, as an alternative to like just staying in an ISO cube, is that they get sent off to Titan, which is one of like fucking Saturn's moons. That's a just kind of an interesting thing. So it's like space travel and all this stuff. It's all existent within like the 2080 world, especially the world of Judge Dredd. Um, but yeah, so oftentimes there's so many stories within the Judge Dredd comic series of oftentimes, and this is also depicted in, I think, kind of like in both films, but mainly in Carl Urban's Dredd, or AKA Alexander Garland's Dredd film. Uh, that's one of the key things. You could argue whether or not Judge Dredd is has a weakness or it's his strength. And I'd say it's a little bit of both, right? Judge Dredd is incorruptible. Out of all the judges last guy who will take a fucking bribe in the world of Mega City 1 is Judge Dredd. That's what he's kind of known to be. He's not a corrupt guy. He is this bioengineered, and that's the key thing too, is that he is almost inhuman in this way. He's not flawed in this way. He can't be bought out. I mean, this is why oftentimes in stories, a lot of times in the comics, and also in the movie Dread, it's because he's not an incorruptible judge that he gets in conflict oftentimes in stories of corrupt judges trying to kill him, trying to murder him because they have their own, they obviously have their little operation to um, profit or just be corrupt within the system, and just be hypocrites, and tyrannical themselves, but just doing all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, Judge Dredd's out there, and if he finds out you're a corrupt judge, I mean, he will kill you. He will try to do something. He will put you, punish you, or whatever. And like and oftentimes this is why there's always like these murder plots of corrupt judges trying to kill Dredd, right? And and again, that's really, I mean, you could argue like in the real world, you could argue that police, politicians, they all have a certain price at a certain level. And this is even true. I mean, and like like no one's really above it all, or it doesn't seem like it. You could just look at history as everyone has, kickbacks, history of taking kickbacks or not, or because then they have to, or they don't get ahead within the system.
You know, these are a lot of the real circumstances. But Judge Dredd himself is just this uncorruptible guy. It makes him almost like, in terms of moral courage, in terms of his morality, it is very firm. It's very grounded. Um, and you know, I think the world really lacks men like him because again, everyone has a price. And that's that's actually kind of puts it in a realm of fantasy. And I also say maybe it's a weakness because this is what really gets in the way of like him, and he can be, I don't know. There's like plots where it's basically him kind of like getting in the way of people. So that's why he always gets in trouble with this, is because he's so incorruptible. Um, Meanwhile, you know, again, it's his also his moral strength and his moral core. It's a core thing about his character, and it's almost, and I say it's almost inhuman, and he is literally kind of inhuman, um, but still heroic because of that. But it's also because he's literally bioengineered to be this super soldier, right? Like he's, you know, he's just genetically modified clone of a past judge. Um, Unfortunately, I have his that judge's name, the chief judge, like leaves his whole thing kind of leaves me. I'm at a loss of his name.
Don't worry, Zuki. Just everybody, just watch the 1995 Sylvester Stallone version, which is still good. It's watchable.
Yeah,
And it does explain a movie version, a film version, not quite the same as the comic, but it's pretty close. So you can watch that and pretty much figure out exactly what Zuki's talking about.
yeah. His judge character. So in that one, in the movie, there's also the return of like Judge Rico, who's this kind of like a nemesis. Although I guess he's that it's not his main nemesis character. But it's just, again, it is his clone brother, Judge Rico. And it's like, who is a very corrupt judge, but not only corrupt, but there's characteristics of Judge Rico, even in the film and also in the comics, you could say that, you know, he's kind of like the polar opposite in terms of like a moral judge, all right, like of Judge Dredd, who, because he's very corrupt. He's a very corrupt guy, and he just turns really rogue and bad. Um, and that's the character of Judge Rico. That Judge Dredd said, like, I got to take you in, and you're a corrupt judge. You know, you take bribes, or you know, you're willing to become just a dirty cop, a dirty judge. Um, and that's that. And to maintain order and whatever. Um, but you know, I just think that's what's really interesting at the characters. At his core, Judge Dredd is incorruptible. Um, and I don't know. I mean, maybe a comic writer will finally make an entire comic book miniseries about Judge Dredd finally taking a bribe, but he just isn't like that. Or I don't know what kind of circumstances where he would like kind of turn a blind eye to something. Although there are moments like that in the comics and in the films, I guess, but it's sort of like it was because of something more. It wasn't just because he turned a blind eye to something by taking a bribe. It was because he wanted to preserve something greater, when the stakes are greater, about trying to save the system or something like this, you know.
No, I think that's a correct articulation exactly of his character. He is incorruptible in terms of like his own morality. And I think that this is also what challenges power, you could say, because as you rightfully said, like the hierarchy is not super favorable to him. And he often gets in trouble, which is funny in a way, because he's the least corrupt among them, and he is inhuman in the sense that he's not reactionary, haha, but he's not reactionary emotionally. He's stoic actually. And but he is human because he does show love and like he does actually care about people and civilians at many times, but it's very subtle, and he doesn't show it outwardly. It's almost like he does everything by action rather than he's not. I mean, his if you've ever watched any of the films or I mean, he talks more in the comic, obviously, but in the films, he's much more. You can tell like a lot's going on in there, but he doesn't have a lot of lines. So I think that that's exactly right. He is human, but he has an inhuman mask, which would obviously would help him psychologically like survive this very harsh world. And no, I think that were all great points, Suki. And so I noticed that you have discussed before his love interests, and I know he has had two specifically, but maybe more. But I wonder if you want to get into that a little.
Well, I won't. No, I haven't really studied too much of that. It was like, there's kind of like that weird relationship with like uh Judge Anderson and who's another one? It's like, well, there's also another female Judge Hershey, but I don't know if he had an affair. It was another one, but it was actually more to do with somebody else. Like it was, I think it was Judge Hershey's mother, but I don't know. I didn't mention. I don't think I've ever mentioned that.
I thought
Of
you did
getting
a
into
post
stuff.
on it, but anyways, it doesn't matter. But I
Yeah.
think it was about how when Judge
And Judge
Hershey is
Hershey.
killed, he goes on he goes for revenge.
So I know with his relationship with Judge Anderson, it just kind of happened because it became natural where she was more like she's a young woman, beautiful woman with like psychic powers he kind of lacks, and it's basically his time with like it just becomes a kind of natural plot point that anyone it's kind of a typical thing with the relationship of a subordinate woman, and then hey, he's an authority figure, he's older and more experienced or whatever, and has a higher status, and that's kind of a natural thing that happens. And this is both like it happens as much as it does in real life as it's kind of written in fiction and stuff like that. But yeah, apparently, he's had like a few other affairs, but oftentimes, if you were to look at the America storyline, that had nothing to do with like Judge Dredd's like personal romantic relationships, but of that one character who's like a singer, um, and he was basically involved with a woman. He's like a famed entertainer who basically gets involved with a revolutionary that wanted to overthrow like the Mega City One system, and then she gets killed off, and then he gets like his mind gets like transplanted in hers, which is a very crazy epic storyline. But this is one of those comics where, and this is Judge Dredd's America. That's the comic. That was the series of comics that was written up. It's one of the more important Judge Dredd stories, but it's one of those stories where like he's not actually the main character in the comic, but and he almost plays like a villainous role in it. In fact, as the draconian cop that brings it all down. Um, but
I find that really interesting. Sorry, Zuki.
Yeah, so
that he's a draconian, and also, but he also serves as kind of a rebel in a way because he is the one to topple it, but he is like the dragon, if you want to call it that. He is kind of like
yeah. There's
cosmic
kind of
rebel.
there's like the Cold Storage Wars comic series line, but again, this is one of the ones where it's like Judge Dredd's older, and the system's already falling apart, and like all the judges are corrupt, and then there's like a civil war that happens, and basically like Judge Dredd like chooses like the rebellious side that does overthrow. But that I mean that stuff goes down the line. This is when like the latter part of the series with like um I guess they've had to disown some of the canon or whatever, but that's kind of the storyline for one of the comics, right? Where there's like a civil war, and it's not the block war stuff. It's not when Judge Dredd goes to like the Soviet city and like and then kills off all these people that were just kind of subversives or trying to destroy Mega City One, and he nukes Russia. Basically, he has nuked the world over before in the comic series. Amazing series with the whole block wars and apocalypse war miniseries that I highly recommend. That's kind of what really set that really solidified a lot of stuff about Judge Dredd back in like the mid '80s when that came out. I think it came out in like '86 or '87. You know, but yeah,
No, that
he
was
was.
great lore drops. Thanks, Zuki. I just want to go back slightly to Judge Anderson because I think she's a really interesting character, especially for like people like me who were reading Judge Dredd as kids but didn't really understand it. And I think that you correctly like laid out what the world is like. It's much more of a multiverse, and I think this is also because like it's had so many writers and so many different people contributing maybe to the canon. And so, yeah, there are elements of it that sometimes things happen in like maybe a different timeline, a different sort of world, but they're all interconnected, they're all interrelated. And so, yeah, I love the sort of like the mutant rebellion arc where he like I know you've talked about this like Spartacus is like the ultimate left-wing film proper, the TV property, but he has a little Spartacus moment. I hope you'll forgive me for saying that, Zuki.
Oh, was that? Oh, in the first film, yeah, with Stallone. But again, the problem with my problem take with Stallone, and let's okay, we could break down the Stallone film, is that okay? First of all, I did like the movie. I like the Stallone's version of Judge Dredd in 1995. It was although I believe Demolition Man's a way better movie, but what I appreciate about the Judge Dredd film back in like '95 with Stallone is that they had the production value, right? It was like the first time studios wanted to take a chance, so they cut a huge fucking check for Judge Dredd, and like to make Judge Dredd into film. They thought maybe okay, this is gonna be the next Batman. This is gonna be the next Superman. It might be we're gonna go all in. We're gonna put like $100 million into this fucking production film. I think that's how much it cost. I think it was $100 million film or over that budget, and like. Well, shit, I don't know. Back in like '95, I think it had to be like 90, like something like
It was
that. It was probably
95.
over.
It was
It was
95. I
95, yeah. So it
remember
was
it very
almost,
distinctly.
yeah. So it was 95 million, and again, it was a box office bomb, and also even the kind of like the base comic fans really didn't like it. In hindsight, I don't think it's that bad, and for guys that just don't really give a shit about the comics, they could find some enjoyment in the film because they're not nerds and they're just be like, hey, I just want to watch a popcorn flick where Stallone has a gun and acts like a fucking badass. And yeah, he's all right. It's the costume is it's good. It is within that like um zone of like the Burton fucking Batman era films. You know how it's very decorative and aesthetic. It's almost close to the comic. Although I feel like Burton's Batman was much more in line with like the aesthetics of the comics compared to say what Judge Dredd was. Well, Judge Dredd, like the 95 Judge Dredd was still pretty good with this because again they had the fucking mutant families. I forget the fucking family name. And then there was like the droids they had, um like the motorcycles, the lawmasters and the lawgiver they had were also fucking great. um and just both like in terms of cinematography and the world that's in Judge Dredd that you see, it does deliver in that respect. And I mean, it just had a much bigger budget. So, they're obviously in terms of the Dread film back in 2012 with Carl Urban, that was that was a bit of a downgrade. Although there's a few things that I really liked. I actually do prefer Carl Urban's costume. It has that more gritty. Again, it kind of shows the age too, because it's sort of like by then we had Christopher Nolan's Batman, and again it became much more like the aesthetics, the bat costume, and all this stuff. It was more tactical. It was more realistic. They were just trying to go for the realism, right? For Batman and Batman Begins in the Dark Knight, you saw this like that's what Nolan went for. Also with Bane's character with the vests and all this stuff, and it was highly that really influenced. I see with 2012's Dread, with kind of like the Judge outfits. There is that kind of grittier, more tactical, more realistic look compared to the comic book look that even 90, like, even the 95 Judge Dredd was kind of going for. But it's kind of funny because, like, in the fucking comic book, right, there's no codpiece. Judge Dredd does not have a codpiece in the comics. It's green fucking, gloves and the green boots, and then the fucking golden, shoulder pads and amulets and chains and stuff like that. And it really shows it's like that 90s comic book movie age with Stallone's like Judge Dredd costume with the fucking codpiece. It's very prominent in that fucking movie. And then in Carl Urban's, again, it's just going for like realism. It looks like a genuine, like, real fucking thing. It looks like you could go to war with, that you're not gonna laugh at. It doesn't look like a costume. It looks like real tactical gear this guy's wearing. Just like in Batman's, in Christopher Nolan's Batman compared to like Tim Burton's Batman.
I totally agree with that. I think that was a really good note. Like there is it's almost like Fifth Elementy, I would say, the 1995 version. Like there's like a little over the top. It's a little homo-fascist, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
There is like an element of that. It's like a little Versace, like that. It's a little overly. And then you're totally right. He goes like very urban, tactical. I can appreciate that. And
Oh yeah,
sorry,
no, go
okay,
ahead.
go for it.
Go ahead.
No,
No,
I
I love that you brought up Fifth Element, because I feel like Fifth Element was like a better representation of like Mega City 1 than like the Judge Dredd of like 95, and even probably even Carl Urban's Judge Dredd, right? Like the Mega Cities, like I see in the comics, it was mostly correctly depicted in the world of Fifth Element. Like that's what the comic books were like of Mega City 1.
yeah,
If you
much
watch
closer.
yeah, much closer. So that's an excellent observation. I really, and again, I love Fifth Element more as a story, as a movie, definitely more than 1995's Judge Dredd, because
Oh
it's
yeah,
basically
Fifth.
like Benson's like version. I mean, I'm almost thinking he had to have been a fan of the fucking Judge Dredd comics, especially with like the artistry of like Carlos Escara. Like that was like Luck Bunsen like did that movie. It was like, dude, this guy was totally reading 2080 comics. Or if I'd be shocked if he didn't know about them. If and making a movie like fucking Fifth Element, which could almost be like a subplot movie, um, like can be based out of Mega City 1, right? I mean, obviously they couldn't do that, obviously, for various circumstances and reasons. But it's almost like it was almost the Judge Dredd movie, like almost like a side plot spin-off, a movie about the Mega City 1 universe without the Judge Dredd. That's what the Fifth Element movie was like in terms of universe building and all this stuff. Because like in the comics, there's like aliens, there's like, it is this futurist cyberpunk universe where with like alien life forms and space travel atop of all this other weird madness, right? Of like dystopian future life and mutant criminals running around and all this other stuff. But they have comforts, they have stuff that, we would only dream of in futurist movies. And just like in the Fifth Element. So
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that you liked my reference, but I think that there is probably a crossover, but because obviously Fifth Element is based on a Moebius comic or a short story that he did with Jodo. So I'm pretty sure that Moebius must have done a strip or the special or some kind of Judge Dredd
So
thing. Yeah, yeah.
Moebius, if he's the French artist, correct? That was the
Yes.
one. And here's the thing. So I'm very familiar with Moebius because he did the fucking original art for Panzer Dragoon back with the Sega Saturn. I don't remember this game. Video
Yes,
game.
a
Yeah.
very, very important video game actually because it really pioneered that like perspectival position, like that you are riding the dragon and you're kind of
Yeah.
like aiming. Like I know it sounds like lame probably to like Zoomers listening, but for at that time, it was one of the first that really even had that mechanic. So really important game.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, now one of the first. It was one of the first. It was kind of like the premiere version for the Sega Saturn. It was just one of those cool games like you could only get it on the Sega Saturn. It was a Sega. It's one of those like kind of Sega trophy games, right? But again, before that was actually Star Fox. that was kind of like advanced. I mean, I wouldn't say. I'm sure there was like some type of PC game that I didn't fucking play that I didn't really care for. But
Flight Sim.
Yeah, but Star Fox was like that. Was that for the Nintendo? And I don't think even like PlayStation really had a really worthy equivalent of this. But Star Fox, but then this time Sega had their Panzer Dragoon. You get to ride the dragon and start shooting little like weird like futurist Archeo-futurist fucking cyberpunk like creatures and weird like aircraft and stuff like that. So um but yeah, because of the art design and the conceptual artwork, a lot of it was done by Moebius, and he was a very great French artist. So yeah, and then I got to look this up if he's done Judge Dredd.
He clearly knew people. He probably knew other comic book writers working on it, even if he didn't himself do it. Like there's so much crossover. And it is interesting that both Moebius and Jodorowsky were both in the Typhonian OTO. I just want to note that because that's like a lot of what my episodes have been about. Zuki is like about people's kind of connection to these magical systems. So, and there's clearly so much metaphysics in um, not only Fifth Element, clearly just in a superficial way, but also maybe deeper. But there's also like a lot of it in Judge Dredd as well. Like there's moral questions of like who man is, what his position is, and like can you create him through bioengineering? Like it's all the things that were kind of, or at least on the quote unquote whatever the right wing Twitter is now, which is maybe nothing, but these are all questions that have sort of cycled through the timeline.
Yeah, so I'd say for like I love a lot of art by Moebius, but his stuff's more like mystical. It's like futuristic but mystical, but obviously that stuff is more oriented towards like that Dune tier science fiction. Obviously, he's actually literally also worked on Dune, like um with the Jodorowsky project that didn't really manifest, unfortunately. But that was his art is definitely, there's like a lot of futurist sci-fi kind of stuff, and I obviously it influenced a lot of people. um and yeah, but I'm always kind of fascinated about the Fifth Element, because that's what I kind of imagine like Mega City 1 is like, if you were to as being a fan of the comic books, right? um and I'd say that's a good companion piece. I'd highly recommend people watch. If they're gonna be fans of Judge Dredd, you gotta watch Fifth Element. It's basically a 2080 film without Judge Dredd. That's how I would put it. There's the
Yeah, it's in the
2080
same
film up.
universe.
You would feel like it's almost the same universe. Like, I mean, for legal reasons or whatever, you can't say this kind of
Hmm.
stuff or consider it. But I would say that was the most accurate way of of manifesting, adapting like the world of Mega City 1 in the comic books into film. It was the Fifth Element. Again, just a fucking great fucking movie that I think people kind of do reference now. They look back on it. I just feel like it's one of those films that should have just done a lot better, and then
Should have
maybe
made
it inspired.
$1 billion. No
It would have
question.
made a bunch of movie, yeah, and maybe even some sequels. But I don't know. I kind of like that it didn't end up
Standalone.
having. It stands alone as a great fucking film,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then it doesn't have to be. It didn't. Yeah, sure. I mean, we were kind of deprived of sequels for this film, but at least it's like they weren't. At least there won't be sequels that were just terrible, right? Because there's always a potential where they make the Fifth Element. The first one's just amazing. It was successful, so they make Fifth Element 2, and it's just like garbage film that just like each like it's just kind of embarrassing, and people want to forget about it. So we always just had that standalone Fifth Element film that's really standalone. I kind of think there's like a lot of potential if like Netflix or HBO will be like, okay, let's take this Fifth Element universe. Let's take this universe and then like adapt it into like a spin-off miniseries from this type of universe. But I don't know. In this day and age, I don't know. I mean, it's possible we have like all this AI stuff now that can generate a lot more better AR cheaply. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know where they're gonna go with it. How that's gonna all integrate.
Well, that's an interesting sort of way to maybe move into the idea of technocracy and how it relates, like dystopia, utopia, and obviously cyberpunk. And I was going to ask you what that means, but maybe before we get into that specifically, I want us to say Fifth Element is one of my favorite movies, Zuki. So I'm so happy to hear that you're excited about it. And also, I totally agree with everything you said. It's a companion piece. It's in the multiverse, whether it's in the same universe, but yeah, it's in the far-flung reaches of the galaxy. And I also think that the characters could easily fit. There's a lot of, as I said, there are metaphysics in Judge Dredd. It is like a dude's comic for sure, but it touches on like a lot of contemporary both politics, as Zuki said, but it also like contains like sort of universal themes of like who we are. And I think Fifth Element also does, and I think it's very much about. I'm gonna use like a more telemic term, Zuki, so I apologize, but it's like very Aeon of Man, like very like man paused, you could say. Like they don't hate us. Like they might be fighting the Archons, like conceptually, but they don't. We're not at such a disadvantage as often sci-fi or cyberpunk or sort of like dystopian fiction posits us. We're always like, like the David versus Goliath. But even though Fifth Element at times feels like that, and Judge Dredd definitely feels like that sometimes, but you have the strength of the characters to rely on. And like I think in both of the properties, both Judge Dredd, all the films, and obviously the comic, and just Judge Dredd himself, and then the Fifth Element and the two main characters, I think that the strength is so overwhelming that you know that there's always going to be a backbone. So to maybe close that point, I don't know if they could reboot it. I'm happy that's a standalone. It's kind of like an epic action love story, which is so rare nowadays. Like they don't really know how to do it. And I think that's also why it didn't
Yeah.
do as well. I didn't think people knew
I
what it
don't.
was.
I'm kind of shocked. Yeah. I think at least people now. I think people look back. I think if there's no. I'm trying to hope maybe like younger people will give the Fifth Element a chance to watch it, because I don't really see it being like memed as much as, I mean, there's these movies that stick around. Like people are just memeing. Well, all these kids younger than me, they went out of their way to like watch everything on in the Sopranos, which I still have been bad at, like actually sitting down and watch the Sopranos. Um,
I've never seen it, just for the
yeah,
record.
I haven't watched Sopranos. I've never watched it. I've never sit down to really finish up the Sopranos. But there's so many memes and Gandolfini's like kind of, what he says or whatever. But I didn't watch it. But American Psycho I did watch. I watched. Well, I didn't watch it in theaters. I watched it, but I watched that movie when it came out, like on DVD. I rented it on Blockbuster, you know, or Hollywood Video. They were using the two chains. They had it, and you watched like American Psycho and then like buy the DVD later and go, it's like, oh, what's a crazy cool movie. It's a good movie. But again, it's kind of funny to see guys would like really embrace that character in a weird way. And
So who's the better Machiavellian character, Suki? Is it American Psycho or is it Judge Dredd? I think that's an interesting question.
No, well, I mean, I think it's going to be. I mean, in terms of like maintaining order, it's going to be Judge Dredd. I mean, I don't know how to say if he is Machiavellian, but like, there's moments within like the Judge Dredd comics. He's very Machiavellian in terms of his like subversive work against dissident movements. I mean, he utilizes undercover work. Um, he does lie. He does manipulate people. He does like do these things to basically remain in power, um, and all this stuff. Uh, well, Americans like, well, the guy's just a serial killer. He just lies. So I mean, just to keep, he has this urge to kill. So he's really bad with that. Not that he's really good with like maintaining any type of power. I don't think.
Well, that's why that character is so popular, because he's totally immoral. Whereas Judge Dredd is amoral, but he has like he has an inner morality, like a self-referential morality. Doesn't even directly come from the hierarchy, as we said. So I think that that is why I think Judge Dredd is a much more complicated character. I think he's much more human in many ways. But yes, he is like a very rigid in a way, but it's also his strength. Like you were saying, like Rico. Rico's perfect because he is also Machiavellian, as you said. And he takes it in this way of like pleasure through degradation, pleasure through like all the kind of like I'm not even talking about like having fun in the world. I'm talking about just like sick shit, like and like being like sort of into causing chaos. Whereas Judge Dredd is very much of order, but he doesn't go about it in necessarily in a quote unquote orderly fashion. He goes about it, as you're saying, in a way where he's singular in will and purpose to actually enact like what he believes is his worldview. Whereas Rico is just like likes things in decoherence, likes things to be very much of the lowest order. And so I think that that is sort of it's a good polarity because it shows like Judge Dredd actually has a lot more to navigate because he tries to, I don't know if he tries to, but the circumstances, life, you could say, karma maybe, forces him into sort of like these greater questions. But he usually does just a reaction. He just goes on his instinct. He's a very instinctual person.
Yeah, well,
Sorry,
with
Zuki.
like so the main like character that I would say is his true nemesis in the comics, and this is kind of like unanimous for a lot of his fans, is Judge Death. That's his like that's how Batman's real true main villain like nemesis in his world is the Joker, right? Um, that's his number one enemy. When or like his greatest foe. That's them always clashing is kind of what's paired off. I mean, for a moment it was Judge Rico, but in reality, it becomes like Judge Death because but again, he's also this supernatural force. That's mainly his thing, though. It's just that he's just more his supernaturalness is basically um that you can't it's hard to kill him because he's kind of like a ghost character that kills people like and he's just like a serial killer um that just kills people that believes like you know he takes like the logic of Judge Dredd's inner morality to an extreme where it's just like well I mean you know i- Judge says don't fucking break the law or I'll find you, punish you, sentence you for whatever crimes and very willing to execute you for high crimes or whatever, sentence you to death. And and then Judge Death deems it as since all life has potential to be criminals, like all life deserves death. And I mean that's how his logic goes to this extreme of pre-crime or something like this, or whatever his logic is. Although he's just kind of like a sadistic character that oftentimes Judge Dredd just has to combat. Um, because he has again he's just a just an intensely evil character where he just represents like not just like law and order really but he is kind of even greater than Satan in terms of he just wants to bring about death for all life on earth.
He's a cosmic nihilist. He just wants, yeah, total destruct. He just wants complete death, like complete void. And so I do think it's interesting because have heard it discussed in like comic book nerd circles that Judge Death might be like that sort of shade or an element, perhaps maybe just an allegory of Judge Dredd himself, like some part of his mind that can go into the extreme nihilism rather than and so that's why he has to combat him and that's sort of almost why he's unkillable because it's also part of himself. But I do think it's interesting because he is kind of adamantine, like to use like a more metaphysical word. I think Judge Dredd actually fits a lot of the categories of like uh, like anti-hero who pursues apotheosis of a kind rather than I'm not saying that he is, but I do think that there are elements of it, even in the costume and the colors that they chose, and just his physicality and representation. And like you talked about, like the lawgiver and the lawmaker, like his gun is cool as fuck, and like the bullets are cool as fuck, and all the things that his motorbike can do is cool as fuck. Like it just is a very it's he's almost like an angel, sort of. Like yeah, he even Judge Dredd himself is supernatural, and part of that is technological.
So, and I'd say that, with the Judge Dredd's, well, the Judge Death stuff, with like the other like kind of four horsemen judges, like Judge Fire, uh, I think it was Judge Necro, and then Judge Fear. They're kind of like, again, but that's what's kind of interesting with Judge Dredd, because like I could actually put that falls under cyberpunk, but also not just in the world of sci-fi, but also like it tinkers on like sci-fi fantasy, right? Like, just, well, I mean, it does, because obviously there's also a lot of supernatural elements within um the Judge Dredd universe, and like, it's not just cyberpunk. That's what's cool about it. It kind of encompasses all kinds of crazy stuff within the comic series. Although, like, the film, like both films, I don't think deals with a lot of supernatural elements that the comics developed as well. For both the Stallone film and Carl Urban's film. But again, I should probably now get into more of the Carl Urban stuff, because the Carl Urban stuff is just very cyberpunk and gritty. By the way, I would say that, I don't know if, like, that's the thing with like the Fifth Element, as you brought up. Here's the thing. That's the thing with the Fifth Element is that I don't think it's very cyberpunk. I think it's very sci-fi fantasy. It's just very sci-fi fantasy, not cyberpunk. It lacks cyberpunk.
No, I want to jump in just quickly, Zuki, and say, yeah, you're totally right. This is blurring the edge. This is like almost like where you would have to call almost speculative fiction, just simply because it's genre bending, and it's also, there's a blurring and a breaking. All three, I think, happen, and so it's very hard to like necessarily pinpoint it. There are elements of cyberpunk, but I wouldn't say like it's not like it's not Ridley Scott. It's not Blade Runner. It's actually quite different than that. And even the sort of like cosmology and ontology of the film, I think, is much different. I think it's positing a sort of different universe. I think Judge Dredd is very interesting because he's very agential. And I'm very interested in this idea of like Junger's Anarch, and like how a man must govern himself. I guess that's Stoic, very similar to Stoicism in some ways, as we mentioned before. And so he does embody that. And I think Carl Urban does the best job at sort of portraying that Stoicism, at least. But he's also kind of Junger's Anarch too. Like, he makes split decisions, execution, and also like he does decide to save people. He's not totally cold, but he's also not like he's not a libtard, and he's not like a bleeding heart, and he's not like, I'm not gonna die for someone else because I have to actually like complete the mission. But he actually warms through the film, and it's so interesting that you brought up like her being sort of she's very complimentary to him because of her psychic powers. It almost makes her too human, too empathetic, and so they almost have to be poles of each other. Whereas he's cold and like almost unfeeling, but he toughens her too. So I mean, it's a really good film. I just want to say that it's a great film. And
Oh yeah, I mean, they got the character dynamics are correct, and I can't. I mean, I don't think there's enough praise for Carl Urban, and he's still very proud of the work he did, and obviously there's a reason why. It's just very unfortunate it wasn't as successful. There were a lot of problems with it, and I mean, I'm hearing they're gonna get White, I don't know, that douchebag from like New Zealand, like that crap dude that made like the Thor movies, like, were stupid, but like, he was assigned to maybe do the new Judge Dredd film, which I find kind of horrifying, because it's probably gonna bomb, and then it's gonna ruin any chance of like the right people to get the check to make the right Judge Dredd film, and it's already kind of fucked in the water. Like, it's already like a fuck deal. Um, but yeah, Carl Urban, again, just can't get enough praise because he gets the character down. If there was any ultimate representation of Judge Dredd, like depicted in in film, it's going to be Karl Urban's portrayal. He does it better than how like Logan portrayed, with Hugh Jackman portraying like Logan, aka Wolverine, in the comic book
Oh
world.
yeah,
Although he's kind of like a
Carl
price
Urban did
character.
better,
Yeah,
much better.
I just. But here's the thing too, which is that I can't really criticize that because I think basically when like Hugh Jackman became Wolverine in the X-Men series, and then there was also he's been in like he starred as Wolverine in like every movie since. That is his character now, and also the Wolverine character in the movies really has been like it's like that's the character of the film Wolverine version is basically it kind of should be taken separate from like the comic book, sort of, like because it's so entrenched with Hugh Jackman's portrayal of it. That's going to be like a much more like bigger task for any actor now to kind of make Wolverine his own thing. And it's kind of hard to imagine now because then again, and I think no one has since like really. I mean, no one, like the studios never like cut a check to any other actor to play Wolverine. But that's like a very unique case though, where someone kind of was able to. No one can replace Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and so the Wolverine character as a film character is like much more unique compared to. I kind of consider that character outside of the comic, the character kind of depicted in the cartoons, movies, and comics, right? I mean, the
He's
cartoons.
different. I
Yeah.
love the cartoon, like as a kid. I mean, I still like the cartoon, but the original X-Men, he's a very different character. He's not jovial, jocular, or joking. He's serious as fuck, and like he is not afraid to tell you exactly what he thinks. And it's not just hot temperedness; it's almost like a perpetual anger. And so, yeah, he is not quite the same as Hugh
Yeah.
Jackman, but I think that you rightfully sort of posit that it is a character that it is Wolverine, but he kind of has his own life through Hugh Jackman in the films.
I think well technically it's like in the comics like Wolverine is shorter and he kind of has like a Napoleon complex I guess a little bit. Um
And he's
but again
Canadian, so he's
yeah, but they're
weird.
both Canadian
Just
though. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, but they're both still Canadian in the film just that uh like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is just very unique. Uh it's just I just could kind of separate between him and the actual comic book character, regardless of how well he does it. It's just like it's his character now, basically. Um, in the sense that I mean, Carl Urban kind of had his chance because I think if Judge if Dredd in 2012 like was successful, yeah, they're gonna you had to just give Carl Urban that character. It's sort of like he is the ultimate actor to play. He is the ultimate portrayal, and like the correct portrayal of Judge Dredd. Even though in the comic, it's just that I still can't separate it from the character. It's just so much that he just did such a good job of representing the character. Like that's who I imagine Judge Dredd is as he is in the comic books, right? Um, that said, like in Judge Dredd's case in the comics, it's like he also has had different artists kind of draw him, and his like kind of physiques actually changed throughout the comics, right? Like one time, sometimes he's like kind of like tall and thin. He's never technically short, but he's also just kind of like sometimes he's kind of pudgier and he's more stocky. Like he's like
Yeah,
a
meteor, like
barrel
meathead. Yeah.
chested, yeah. So, um, he has that kind of weird depictions while but it doesn't really matter like in my mind it was like Carl Urban really perfected what I feel is how Judge Dredd should be portrayed as a character in film as well, so yeah.
No, I agree. One of my favorite, I want you to tell me what one of your favorite scenes in the film was, but for me, I have two. One is in the, I guess it's like a utility room with all the pipes, like must be like a plumbing sort of like interchange room, and he gets in the a shootout with one of the judges, one of the corrupt judges, and he only has certain bullets left, so he has to use like he has to use his mind more. And I just think exactly exemplifies what you're talking about in regards to like Karl Urban and his portrayal, because he, even when he gets shot, he deals with it. He goes like, oh shit, like, oh fuck. But he knows he's in shit, but he's like, he's not like sitting there crying. He does this little med pack thing, and then he, picks himself up and attempts to take out this other judge. And then my other favorite scene is obviously with the drug, which is very interesting because it does actually slow down the perception of time. And so it's obviously the very iconic / Kino end sequence where he throws Mama out of the window, and so she'll fall to her death in the tower, which is exactly how the film began. So very like chronopoetic in a way.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny. He actually like administers the drug to Ma, and then kills her. Like, as he like, and he sentenced her to death. Guys, I guess he just runs out of ammo, so he fucking flings her off the fucking window. Like, defenestrates her, and where she falls to her death. But I thought that was more interesting. That was an interesting take. If he would even do that, like, why even give her that like one last high before she's killed?
Well,
I don't know
it made the drop down. It made the drop down last for like however long the time extension was. So even if she fell and it would have like, we would have, outside observer would have perceived her falling down very quickly, as a body would. Her experience of it would have actually been a lot slower. So for her mind, it might have taken 10 minutes or however long it is for her to fall like those 100 stories. So I felt like that's why he did it. It was like cruel. It was kind of like mean, but like very. It was fitting because she was pretty bad.
Yeah, and this is what she was like profiting off from everyone else. Just kind of an interesting decision he did, and I wouldn't say he would never do that in the comics. I just found that kind of interesting. But still, there's like there's moments with like with the hot shot scene. That's a really classic moment. He kind of, so with Karl Urban's character, yeah, it is this kind of dirty, hairy like voice he has. It's not like deep throat like Batman, where he's just trying to obscure his voice to be to hide his identity. It's just that he is the dirty Harry with the helmet.
That's a great comparison. That's exactly what it's like. He's like almost like, he's not a LARPer. I think that's the difference. I think you're even getting at this. He's not LARPing at being like a ultra butch, like mask, like I'm gonna fucking kill you with my awesome machine, like my gun that shoots like all kinds of bullets. He is that. He doesn't need to play at it. Like, it is fundamentally who he is. Like, it's a dirty Harry, I'm gonna win.
Yeah. And ironically enough, he's not dirty. I mean, if you have the term "dirty cop," obviously for a corrupt judge, and again, he's the most incorruptible. And again, that's in the film. It's just that it's another episode of like Judge Dredd dealing with like corrupt judges with like in cahoots with these guys, like dealing drugs or whatever, and he has to combat a very like corrupt judge system, like a group of corrupt judges alongside like criminal kingpin. That's just a great execution for the movie. It was a great it's a great introduction to the character for people that if you didn't even read the comics, you should just watch that fucking film. And it's like, no, that represents Dredd in every sense. He's a perfect representation, or the close, like the best at it so far. Yeah, highly recommend Apocalypse War, America, and there's a few other ones I'm gonna hold back on, but anyone's willing to, read all the case files and stuff like that. Just you can do that, but yeah, there's like a few key things, but yeah, just highly recommend stuff, and all these. There's an explosion of like YouTube material now of Judge Dredd, which I find kind of refreshing. Like it was kind of a dearth thing. Hardly any videos about video essays on Judge Dredd, like 7 years ago, and then now there's like 20, 15, like all kinds of video essays on Judge Dredd. And in my, and I was one of the early people really kind of promoting the comic character on the internet, then now I see there's this reaching a wider audience, and especially for a new generation of people, and that's cool. Thanks.
It totally is cool, and it also is like we're just ahead of the curve, Zuki. That's it. Like we're just you know, two bros that are just a little avant-garde, a little ahead of our time. The things that we like and the sort of like aesthetic affect that we sort of feel like embodies our archetype. So I totally agree with you.
Thumbs up. Yeah, I can't do reacts here. Sometimes I wanted a heart and like do a thumbs up. We live in, we're gonna live in a time where I don't think we're gonna have too much of a Judge Dredd future. Although it can get there, or there are moments like this, especially when like in the comics, there are these like mutant freaks that are just committing all kinds of evil terrorism. And again, you need a judge, you need an answer to this, right? In the comics, in both, and also in the film, of like lawlessness or people who have disregard for the sanctity of like basic normal life for a lot of people, and they commit acts of terrorism or whatever, or they're just trying to take over the government or some shit like that. And Judge Dredd's answer is to, well, he's not really a killer. He's not somebody who's just kind of like trying to he's not like the Punisher. It's just that if you're committing a crime, I mean, yeah, he will sentence you to death, but he will give you due process. He will try to do that. He won't try to kill you if you try to kill him immediately, just within immediate actions or whatever.
That's a
Or
great distinction.
Yeah.
That's a great distinction with the Punisher, especially because Simon Bisley did also illustrate for the Punisher as he did for Judge Dredd. So
Yeah.
there is like a lot of continuity with like the artists and the writers again. And yeah, he is not the Punisher. He's not
Yes.
extrajudicial. That's a great note. Thank you, Zuki.
He's actually, yeah, I mean, like the Punisher's actually, he probably has more in common with Judge Death than just with uh with Judge Dredd, because Judge Dredd still wants to maintain the system. He doesn't really care for vigilantes, or he wouldn't think twice also punishing and bringing vigilantes to justice like the Punisher for whatever reason. Because again, it's just like, yeah, you're not, if you wanted to like enact death sentences to people, well, you gotta, you should have become a judge or something like that. So I'm probably gonna have to sentence you to death and do that. But yeah, I mean, what is going on too is that even in the universe of Judge Dredd, again, they have like undercover police programs, a lot of subversive kind of stuff that goes on. They even do false flag operations among the judges. Um, and in the case of Judge Dredd, again, they do have a surveillance state. Well, not just the surveillance, but a police state. Currently, in our world, in real life world, we do have a surveillance state, even also very much so in America, although it's kind of like privatized, and it's not really something, um unless besides a few more exceptional cases, it's not something that the government can directly utilize immediately, try to nail you for something, although that also can happen. um but it's kind of like we also have too much liberalism, basically, so that a lot of oftentimes people kind of, either authorities don't really want to do much of it, or unless you become like a political enemy of the whichever political class is in power that was put in democratically. Or like, so yeah, we're not getting into the state of like kind of what China has, although they kind of have like a much more better orderly system of it. Although I don't think like there's like not a lot of Judge Dredd figures like walking around in China, except like I think it would be kind of scary, because I think there's a lot of like, um police officers in America that could really will become really interesting if given the authority, because they all just kind of walk around with guns too. While like in China, I don't know how it is in China or Korea. In Korea, it's like that. I mean, that's also an interesting thing. Like, so Korea, like South Korea, and I mean, obviously that this is also kind of true in the North, but like in South Korea, they have like very sophisticated surveillance state capability, just like they do in America. Same thing with China. But again, the laws are much more, there's much more authority within the Korean system, so that law enforcement and like policing, you just can't get away with a lot. You want to be a little too rambunctious or something like that, you get busted. And I mean that is the case with Johnny Somali. Although the process with, like, say, foreigners who want to do stunts streaming and just to piss off Korean society or whatever, they end up getting arrested and they're gonna like get sentenced for a bit of a long time but they're not sentenced immediately. I don't know if we're ever gonna have that. Probably not ever. Where like even China, even other authoritarian states, like with like Islamic law, so to speak, like Saudi Arabia, they still have this kind of due process system, regardless of how like shitty the human rights record is or whatever. They still go, okay, you have to go through court, you have to go to the process, you have a cleric or somebody evaluate your crime and sentence you to prison or sentence you to death. Like in Judge Dredd, it's all in one, right? It's all in one package. It's all expedited. It's all right there at the fucking um the moment, they find a perp or some shit like that, right? So um that's kind of interesting whether that could ever really happen, if it's ever really possible. But you know, I kind of doubt it will. But outside of that, you do have people becoming much more radicalized, willing to commit all kinds of heinous crimes. I mean, we just recently have observed a terrorist attack in another part of the world, so you could kind of guess what time this thing has been recorded. But but again, this is when you need figures like Judge Dredd to come in and take care of business. And I think people want that. People yearn for that instead
Definitely
of
people yearn for that on like your side and my side of Twitter. I see people like specifically saying like we need, I don't know if they envision it as a Judge Dredd character, but and I do agree that your point about like police officers and just like the normie kind of like law enforcement people on the ground, it would be rather interesting to see what like a life would be where they had increased vested authority, almost like a judge, maybe not extrajudicial killing, like, well, not, they're not extrajudicial obviously, but it is outside the court system specifically. But I do think it's an interesting note that you said about like Saudi Arabia or even Iran or any of those places. Like people, I think by history, we're always go for the code. Like we like law to be codified. And so when there's something about it that we feel like it has maybe a divine or supernatural authority, so we tend to
But we're
test.
frustrated at the bureaucratic nature of it, or it's like, why are we giving this guy this guy committed the crime on camera? We know it's him. Why are we spending money to give him a fucking defense attorney or whoever, and just like have it like Japan? They have like a 98 percent or 99% like successful conviction rate, right? Um, Although I think that's going to
They
be much more
only
possible. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think we'll see. We have to see because I think that the bureaucracy, in a way, like it's very stagnant, it's very decayed. I don't know. I think you agree with me on that, but I think that we'll have to see like what the next 10 years holds because a lot of the changes that were made, we'll say like post 2001, they took a long time to enact. Like it took a long time to filter into popular consciousness, at least. And so now I think people are like a lot more aware of like these kinds of DAs and judges and activist judges and all of that, and how they do, to bring up something you said at the very beginning, they do believe in the idea of giving mercy to the guilty, which is not, I wouldn't say, for me, that's not inherently bad, but it's like, what do you mean by mercy? And so my definition and their definition of that is very different. So
It's like, well, I think mercy would be, I mean, they don't have to live in like the worst conditions ever in prison, but it's sort of like they have to serve their prison time. They have
absolutely.
to, all this other stuff or
I'm
be
not even
separate.
against
Yeah.
I'm not even against like a Judge Dredd style, like if you've done something really heinous, like there's something kind of appealing and like I don't know, it just, there's something kind of moral about that. So that could be merciful. That, I mean, you could make a case for it. I would make a case for it.
Yeah. Well, in the case of like, Judge Dredd, his preferred executions, obviously, he kills them with the lawgiver when he's passed death sentences. I believe there's like, and I think it's better off. Let's say, I mean, it's going to become a more morbid, macabre discussion about like the death penalty and executions. I personally don't like. I don't want to see people. People demand people just be hung back in. Back then we should just have these people hung and put out in public displays. And I'm just like, I just really don't care for that. I just want. I do believe in the death penalty though, because
Mhm.
I think it's kind of stupid to have when the state can wage war, and again, and in those circumstances civilian deaths happen, and this has to be disregarded for the sake of like the personal safety of your side, your soldiers or whoever, and to complete the mission. And I think if you're like, and I don't know why we give like, why it's like much more heinous if we are to sentence someone to death for high crimes, which I think is very much a acceptable thing. But I also don't. I personally think it should just go back to shooting squads. We could give you your little Happy Meal, your good cheeseburger or something like this for your final meal, and then be done with that, and just make it like a quick thing. But
Well,
I guess
perpetual. No, sorry, Zuki, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just mean yeah, I totally agree with you. Like I'm on board 100%. Like I'm not into the spectacle. I don't think that we need to go back to like the 1750s and be like, yeah, we need to do like a chain gang or whatever it is, a lynch mob. I don't think that's the answer at all. I think it's much more, and I don't like to see the state particularly invested with the powers of life or death, which is perhaps an interesting perspective to have since we discussed Judge Dredd. But I do agree that I believe in the death penalty, and I think that it can be more merciful, because is it merciful to extend someone's life in perpetuity in like solitary confinement, or even just in general prison? Like I don't think that is like sentencing some people for like 150 years. Like to me that doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. It's not fiscal, it's not there's so many reasons. So I don't know. So I'm on board with what you're saying, Zuki.
The term for like say cruel and unusual punishment, I always thought that was kind of a bullshit line because well, besides maybe the cruel part, but when like anything could be usual, like anything's unusual if you don't do it enough, right? And anything can become usual when you do it enough. Because apparently like death penalty ended up just becoming classified as unusual for whatever reason, when it was actually like the norm for basically every human society, um for whatever crimes, right? Like they've had a death penalty. They had a right to execute for if someone, if someone committed a crime within the society, or and and like literally even even today you have like like the court cases like titled like someone versus the people of the United States, because this guy's a criminal. He committed a crime against the public, against society at large. Whether or not you feel kind of oof, problematic about the state having powers of life or death. I mean, again, this is true for like any fucking state with a military. Of like, again, if you have an army, you're willing to go to war, you're willing to kill, you're willing to defend, you're willing to attack for your interests, for the interests of the state and for the public. So like that to me, any especially any modern state that's already practicing warfare or actively engaging in warfare, I don't see why it's a leap to then say, but our exceptions though is that we won't commit, we won't sentence someone to death in our society, even though we have our army right now like killing people in some in foreign conflict or whatever conflict we have. Like the state has the power to do this already, regardless of even if the other party is guilty or not, or a truly active threat or not. Um, or we're willing to kind of take that risk, or willing to um, have people killed like due to collateral damage in terms of targeting with the warfare weaponry we have, so that I just think it's totally backwards. It's just like, okay, but if you have someone who you know, or who from reasonable like degree of evidence, or no, of whatever crime that was committed, especially if it's like murder or something, like you're gonna hold back, and we can't like have this guy sentenced to death. That's kind of backward. That's kind of not, I think you're better off trying to actually, you should actually also, you could make an argument. I think that one count, which I actually don't like the guy, but he made a very good argument saying that, it's a lot of times like a state willing to execute people for high crimes, that's that values life more than anything, because if someone were to say go on a mass murder spree, again, or some kind of terrible crime against others, against the public, he's going to you're also kind of putting a value on the life of their victims, and as to why the state is going to execute you for whatever, not you, but just notionally someone who commits a terrible crime, as you've devalued that other disregard lives. So we're going to have to just kind of sentence you, and you, because of that. I mean, that's the kind of whole moral argument about it, right? And oftentimes that's actually why you kind of put a value on the victims, so that's why you do it. To me, that's a very compelling argument, and exactly why. And also, the other argument to me is just that if a state has the power to wage war, and actively engages in war, it's ridiculous that somehow they have to kind of refrain from executing criminals that have committed high crimes against the public.
I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said, Zuki. I'm not necessarily like the world's most like articulate political thinker for sure. Like I have a co-host who often comes on the show, and he's I rely on him for more the kind of like base right wing like political takes. But I'm listening. I'm trying to figure out exactly what I think, and sort of like look forward and not be I think a lot of the right gets stuck in sort of like trad positions that I think are not useful and not pragmatic and not really generative. And so I would rather be forward thinking, and not in a progressive way, just simply that I want to look at like what we can actually do and what we can actually achieve, rather than always like black pill and say we all need to be Puritans again in on the in the colonies. That's a great place to close like our discussion of Dredd. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on, and also like you are a fan favorite. I know I kind of told you a little pre-recording, but you are like, I got a lot of people being like, yeah, Zuki's like, his stories are crazy and they're really interesting. And I know I know you issue like the kind of like hyphenated American. I do too, like just American, or Hapaborean as I like to say. But I think there is like a kind of, maybe we'll say, shadow or parallel history of Asian America that I think is untold. I think it's really interesting, and I don't think it's left coded, is what I'll say about that. And I think that you exemplify this the best with some of your rooftop Korean memes, which you always come with when the season strikes. Have a great night.
You too. Have a good night.